I woke up late this morning after a really long night. My girlfriend was just coming home from getting her hair done. She'd already been out. Before I went to bed, I had an idea that the news this morning, today, was going to be a doozy. Knowing what it's going to be and accepting your fate when the markets actually open are two different things. The first things that hit me were continued news about Palestinians in Gaza firing missiles at Israel, who had returned with an airstrike of their own. A pipeline that brings a lot of gasoline to the southeast had been hacked, and there were residual shortages that were starting to look like a real problem. When yesterday it seemed like things just might be overblown, and due to the major hysteria that society employs these days, the real problem may have just been folks hoarding gas. But today it looked like something a bit more serious. The stock market was crashing. Most of the crypto market was as well. The number 3 Republican in Congress had been ousted because of her anti-Trump rhetoric. And rounding out the top news of the day were overexuberant doofs talking about a new crypto called Internet Computer, which is a very meta name, that had just been released on a very small number of exchanges and had achieved a market cap in the billions already. To say what we think affects our country as a little all over the place is an understatement. The last time that I did a podcast on the stock market, I talked about how important it was that Biden get his stimulus plan out and that it contained some key features. And if he did that, the market, pending another world disaster, should see another bull run. I said that bull run may well go into the fall. And at this moment in time, I would say that the probability of the bull run ending sooner than that is above 50%. The historic run we had in 2020 was fueled by individuals who had savings and had investments receiving stimulus that they were then able to continue to just chuck into crypto markets and retirement accounts, and huge injection from the Federal Reserve as far as asset buying. A lot of folks benefited from it, especially people who were heavily invested before that in the market. And that in turn allowed wealthy people to afford homes, which have also been on a parabolic value incline, and other wealth stores, while people in lower wealth brackets were either struggling to pay their bills with stimulus that they were receiving because they didn't have any savings and they didn't have other streams of income. Sorry, I had a technical difficulty. For people in lower income brackets, for the most part, their stimulus money went towards paying their bills. Most people in lower income brackets don't have any appreciable amount of savings to get through a disaster. Most people have less than $1,000 that they can use in case of emergency. And so their money was continuing to be eaten up by a system that has continued to see rising rent prices and, like I said, home prices. On top of that, goods were getting more expensive. Inflation as a problem has been here and was most evident through prices of real estate last year. But we've been seeing costs of materials and goods rise steadily all year, and that's been largely ignored outside of lumber by major media, our government, and the Federal Reserve, And now all of a sudden they're acting surprised that their policies are creating this sort of snowball effect. When really, I think it's probably 50% of people, doing this messaging are that dumb. They're probably the same people who were surprised by the real estate bubble crashing 10 years ago. And the other 50% are probably trying to hide the fact that they know that they've created an out-of-control monster. The other thing that you saw people in lower income brackets do, if they were fortunate enough to have some additional sources of income, was start investing in the stock market themselves. Like advertisements on primetime television, the runs of GameStop and AMC, and the battles against the hedge funds and the parabolic movement of cryptocurrency made investing seem a lot more exciting than it probably should be perceived as. It should be perceived as a necessary part of adulthood and existing as a citizen in America, but it shouldn't be perceived as the thing that's going to make you rich. And those advertisements were telling people that it would make them rich, and it caused people to over-leverage themselves with investments in the stock market and cryptocurrency. The psychological problem there was they got greedy and continued to put more and more in because it seemed like any investment they made was making money, which in turn convinces some people that they're really talented investors and not just beneficiaries of a bull run. This psychological issue physically made it such that they were now a slave to the market. And if a big sell-off occurred, they would either do what's most likely the wrong thing and pull out their money for big losses, probably not enough to cover their impending debts, or they would be stuck in the market for a long time without the ability to pull out their money for any sort of profit that sets them up for big trouble when it comes to hyperinflation or a depressed society or economy. What that means for the country is if a disaster, like May on a small scale, another technical difficulty. If that pandemic assistance that they've been relying on ends going into the September 6th or sometime after, the country falls into a depression where there's hyperinflation, these people are going to just be going into debt and losing their homes left and right. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, but what I am saying is what we've been trying to prevent will start having happen on a massive scale rather than, in retrospect, maybe we could have done pandemic assistance in a different way that made it more sustainable. This scenario is what's got people talking about the potential of universal basic income, that it may happen by what the government perceives as a necessity. Because if all of these people are becoming homeless when we're already having a huge homeless problem and no one can afford a home and no one can afford food and there's no more assistance, we might think that there are bigger problems coming our way than sending people a few $100 a week. That's a slippery slope to me. I don't know. I can relate to both sides. I want every penny I have to be worth as much as possible because I work so hard for it. But in many ways, I'm also a slave to the market. As a trader, I have as much working capital as I can invested in the stock market. Part of that involves coming in and out with some frequency with some part of the portfolio, while also having long-term investments that I don't touch, but hopefully I really don't ever touch for years, and they can grow like a traditional investor's account. But I've got to walk a tightrope between securing enough profits and holding enough cash in my account, knowing that conditions are very dangerous, and not missing out on those important runs up, the bull runs, with having too little money in the market. And that's what I've been trying to do, and I've been talking about for the better part of a year, is continue to secure more cash such that I'm safe. But you also want to pay the bills. And for a trader, that's the biggest trade you're making. How much do you take out versus how much do you leave in? The more money you have in the market, the easier it is to make some money. It also means you lose more money. So hopefully I'm in the right position. But who knows, if something catastrophic happened and I had made the wrong decision, maybe I would find myself, on the other side of when unemployment benefits would have been available, of desperately needing that to keep my home. And I'm not really close to being in danger of that. I just know that it can happen very fast. And so many people in lower tax brackets in this country don't know that about the market, but they have the majority of their extra money tied up in it right now. They're not prepared for when a market loses 50% of its value. I mean, even the most prepared aren't prepared for it, but this would ruin them. The recklessness that people have thrown money into Dogecoin and before that GameStop, you just know that they're going to be on the wrong side of timing when and if the market crashes. Right now, if the market crashed, there's a significant divide in what would happen to folks in the country. We have more people than ever who have good paying jobs that could make them really just be able to shrug off a period of depression. In earlier days, when the economy went through a couple of hard years, a very large number of Americans had enough savings to make it through a year. They also had lower overheads. Now, if in this depression jobs just began disappearing left and right, and many of these people found themselves without any income, they would have a big problem. But if our infrastructure that has existed and made it through this pandemic, essentially a lot of that is what is essential. I think we found it acted as a filter. With that said, part of the confusion with that filter is how many businesses are or were propped up by PPP loans, and how many shouldn't really be still going, and how many won't fare well when the stimulus ends. If those upper class individuals keep their jobs, they can weather the storm, that'll be good for them, but that won't be representative of what's happening to at least 50% of our country. Whereas a smaller percentage in the past were the ones who were disenfranchised and unable to make it through hard times. And don't get me wrong, people struggled, but people were still able to survive. Nowadays, people with their $600 in savings, they won't last very long. And the massive inflation that's crept up amplifies that. Food is expensive. Wood is at an all-time high. Gas has now hit the trigger. I'm not predicting a depression. I think that even though this feels to me like 2008, especially the confidence that so many people have investing a lot of money into property that probably isn't worth what it's worth or what it's selling for. But our culture is dominated more by hysteria and anticipation than any other time since we have had communication devices like telephones, and we're able to communicate and share news with the rest of the world. Now that news is manipulated and delivered in such a manipulative way that we really don't know what's up and down. We don't know how bad things are. Israel and Palestine have been fighting each other for as long as anyone's been fighting. It's literally a holy war. They can't figure it out. It's been a while, but it's only been years since they had a skirmish like they're having right now. We have a price spike with gas and oil every summer, and the stock market has been inflated for years. That hasn't prevented the market from going up for years. So who's to really say that just because we feel more hysterical in May 2021, that conditions are ripe for a depression or a major sell-off? I've been saying that I'm ready for the market to trade sideways at least through the summer. That would almost make me feel better about things. We need crypto legislation. Right now there is excessive taxing on transactions being treated as gain taxes as well as requiring sales tax. That's another thing that traders right now, new traders of crypto, often aren't aware of, is what the tax implications are going to be, and that they're paying 20% on top of 20% on top of 20%, and they may never actually realize any gains, even if on paper they think they have. I'd like to know what's going to happen with that, with the market cap on crypto internationally being so massive and so much investment pouring in. I would like to see what our economy can look like post-assistance. What companies are really going to hang around? Which companies in the S&P 500 really belong? I personally think that there's like 1/3 of them that don't need to be around, much less having international investment. Part of the issue is the Biden administration has lost a lot of momentum. Issues are remaining unaddressed, and a good speculator would speculate that once these bills and proposals really get down to it through the House and Senate, the Republicans, even though they don't possess a majority, are going to be fighting tooth and nail to slow these things down. There is what could be some dangerous policy in this ultra spending. I don't think anybody will really be able to agree on every point, but if you go look at the spending proposals, there's some stuff you'll probably feel is unnecessary, whether that's the investment in other countries without anything expected back, good old foreign aid, or propping up industries that you may feel are unnecessary, or ignoring other industries that because you know those industries well, have glaring holes in their infrastructure and need updating. The pipeline that Biden canceled in his first days in office was an example of that kind of debate, where people in the petrol industry will tell you, and even Elon Musk, who is in the alternative energy industry, will tell you, we need gas and oil in order to continue to fuel these alternative fuels, their invention and their production. People in the petrol industry will tell you that we need pipelines to improve efficiency and safety. And a lot of people on the other side of that argument, not wanting the pipeline's construction to go from Canada into the United States, they've forgotten that we're going to continue to need these energy resources, even as we become more dependent on solar and other alternative fuel sources. So people would say we should have continued to fund that. In fact, we should have put more money into the Keystone Pipeline. But we've got to get some growth going. And part of that is the way that we're signaling our public health. This political tool that the pandemic has become has got vaccinated people walking around with 2 masks on. Different states having policies that make absolutely no sense when it comes to the actual numbers about public health and infection rates of COVID, that are preventing businesses from operating at a capacity that would sustain their overhead, much less employ everyone that needs to be employed, and then potentially fuel growth. And because of the skewed dynamics of all that, you can't blame people for not wanting to go back to low-paying jobs that would make their life harder to afford due to this current inflation and rent and mortgage levels, when they're able to depend on this easier income that allows them to also work on other side hustles that might give them a chance to one day accumulate some financial security. It's a lot to ask. It's a tough scenario. It's not that everyone's lazy, and some people are, but for some people the scenario just, they know that come December they won't be able to pay their bills. Everyone's bills went up during the pandemic. I'd suggest maybe, unless you know something that no one else does, you put pause on your heavy, long investments right now. Pay more attention to things like metals. Right? People are putting money in gold, and I think we need to be realistic about gold. Some big names in terms of like the financial pop culture, like Peter Schiff and Ray Dalio, and well, really like almost every major hedge fund and bank, they own a lot of gold. But let's not make gold into something it's not. People are arguing right now, well, gold is better than Bitcoin because it has uses. Yeah, gold has uses, but also like gold's not that useful. The drama that you bring to that discussion makes it fit into a scenario where the grid goes down and we're running around, bartering for food and living off the land. And if and when that happens, gold isn't going to do much for you. It's going to be about like food and ammunition. Of course, land has been king over time. Just to reiterate some basic philosophical issues with land, right now, and I'm not saying it should be one way or another, I'm just trying to spell out for you how it works for different socioeconomic classes and people with different levels of equity. Some people have owned enough land already that they've just expanded their portfolio, and they're not in debt on most of the land. A lot of the properties they outright own, or they have income-producing properties like housing, and those things are always going to have cash flow, which is going to essentially guarantee that the bank allows them to keep it, even if they're not able to pay the full mortgage at some point. But land right now for someone trying to accumulate wealth is so expensive. They're immediately going to be disenfranchised if something like the grid goes down. Those people aren't going to be interested in gold. The way the United States economy historically works, it benefits from housing being affordable and it being reasonable for Americans to buy their own property. That wasn't always the case, but when we began the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac programs, the ideas were to spur education such that it became an industry itself, and spur real estate such that home buying became part of the American family's trajectory. And our debt systems are reflective of that. That doesn't mean that people should be able to afford nice homes or the home they want, but they should be able to afford, this is all in theory. This isn't what I think. In theory, they should be able to afford a condo or a small 1 or 2 bedroom, 800 square foot starter home and build equity in that. If they're someone who is, say, a 2-income family, both working full time. And if someone's able to keep a full-time job for, say, a year, they should be able to, in theory, advance towards making a livable wage. And minimum wage, as it is in the American economy, theoretically, is not a livable wage. It's a minimum wage. It's a minimum wage that provides incentive for someone to show up, but also provides an incentive for them to move up and to take on higher skilled jobs or more responsibility, and in turn, receive more compensation. Right now, it's very hard for a working man to build up that way. It may take them their entire lifetime to buy a starter home. And if that's the case, taking on debt doesn't make them a lot of money. And disincentivizes that whole system. At some point, you end up just with wealthy people essentially being the landlords of the bottom half or 3/4 of the country and owning all the property and trading it around just like stocks. And there is some merger of that right now. I mean, you can get into REITs, but home ownership remains decentralized. And it won't stay that way if lower income people can never afford their own housing, which is what, you tell people, you tell the poorest people, the people dependent on the system, listen, you want to pursue the American dream. You want to work hard so that you can get out of the system. But that disincentivizes people within a system to work harder for what? I can never buy a home. I can never stop working with enough savings from retirement or from the market. What is my real incentive to get off of this system, especially when the system pays people more and more to have more and more children? And that integration into a government-subsidized system isn't just about the bottom of the totem pole. When you can't work privately or generate enough savings on your own over your lifetime to retire, what do you start to look for? You start to look for pensions and retirement plans subsidized by the government. You start to look for government jobs. You start to create more burden on that government infrastructure. You start demanding that it get bigger and take over more and more industry so that it can guarantee that someone can work X number of years and then receive a livable amount of money in their retirement. And that's the opposite of the land of the free. That's the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing here as Americans. I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying in theory. But we've got to pull back from some of these processes that we've begun if we don't want to all end up dependent on sucking on the government's teat. That broken type system we've been talking about within education. I believe it was in 2004 or 2005, George Bush made it illegal to declare bankruptcy on student loans. When student loans first came out, they were intended to get more people educated in the United States, and they were at interest rates of like 1%. It made sense. Also, college tuition has increased parabolically. It's broken with inflation. It's been that way for a long time since it became a subsidized industry. So people have taken out more and more debt for increasingly higher interest rates. My student loan debt was between 6 and 8%. There's an industry built around talking me into it and talking me through it. An employee from the school would literally walk me through my loan applications and have me fill it out such that I took out as much money as humanly possible, to buy books and stuff. Books that didn't help me, just like half of the classes, but I paid full price for. In fact, I typically paid an inflated price for everything through the college. This year's student loan debt is going to be approaching $2 trillion. It's over $1.5 trillion. What does that number mean? Well, that number is less than we've been shelling out with stimulus. But that number is more than we're ever going to pay off. And that number doesn't really reflect the debt of the students, right? Well, of course it does, Patrick. The students took on that debt. But that's not what the students thought they were taking on or were sold on, right? Students were sold by their parents and the education system and the industry that you need to go to college in order to have a career that pays you enough to make enough money, to buy a house, to invest in retirement, to have a family, to then get a bigger house, to then take your family on vacation and continue to invest in retirement. Education was supposed to provide that expertise. But not only do many non-technical degrees not match up with their salaries in terms of their cost. For instance, like to become a doctor of poetry, you're spending a couple $100,000 and you're going to have a hard time ever making more than $50,000 a year. That should be explained and understood, and kids who are barely even adults probably should be disincentivized from signing up for a track like that when we know it's going to cause them problems down the road. My chiropractic education, and the average chiropractor makes like $60,000 a year, and they've got to do some questionable stuff to get there. Now, that doesn't mean that there are other chiropractors, especially ones who start incorporating real medicine into their practices and stuff like that pull in an honest six figures, but they're the outliers. Like, they're big-time outliers. And yet chiropractic college costs just as much as a medical degree. It costs about $200,000 at a high interest rate. And when you're paying back that note, that doesn't allow you to buy a house or to, support a family or do any of those things that are the American dream. What it does allow at that level is it allows the teachers at that college to get better benefits than any of their students are going to get retirement. It allows a lot of the administration to make six figures and more. It allows the ancillary system to make big bucks and to have big investment accounts. But we can't pay it back. So are we just going to keep burdening, that on the each wave of students who comes out? Are we going to just disincentivize every coming generation before they're even into the workforce? Or do we start going about it a different way? Do we start forcing colleges to be more efficient? Do we stop supporting programs that don't generate real money? It's hard to make the argument that we should just cancel student debt, because what has the country gained from all those English majors? What has the company really gained from all those bachelors of arts degrees? Right? Like, when we started student loans, we wanted more engineers and we wanted more scientists and shit like that. And if we had more engineers and more scientists and we were subsidizing kids going to school like other nations often do for those technical degrees, man, we'd have a jamming, motivated workforce and we'd have kids excited to sign up, right? Like, we allow people to go sign up and we pay them and subsidize their education if they'll go to war. And that's admirable, and I think that we should do that. But when we talk about, the war at home or the fight we have for our resiliency as a nation, maybe we want to start putting some troops into society who are really big contributors. Guys like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel will say that you don't really need a college education to be successful. And in fact, you can learn anything you want on the computer. And a lot of times colleges can't teach you engineering or computer programming as well as one can just teach themselves through utilizing software. So they don't hire people coming out of college necessarily. They just have aptitude tests and very sophisticated interview processes, and they find people who are capable regardless of that degree or debt. In fact, Peter Thiel has a foundation where he pays people to not go to the colleges they've got accepted into and take a large amount of money and go chase their dreams. See what they can do with it. But as he will tell you, that's not scalable. The evaluation process is too rigorous, and what's expected of the students is just way above average. Your average student isn't going to be able to achieve what he requires to fund someone that way. But what we could do is we could look at the education system and see what's really necessary, and we could fund that. And we could not allow people to go into debt over things that aren't going to pay them appropriately. If someone wants to study poetry and they can afford it, great. Go to college and study poetry. But you can also get the same data for free on the internet, or for $100 purchasing, on Audible, all of the lectures for an entire 4 years of college. You could pay $100 or $200 instead of $100,000 or $200,000. So someone can't actually afford it, but they really want to learn about poetry, they can get that education. There's even suggestion of allowing college level tests, just like you get your GED, where you could get like an English degree certificate by passing an aptitude test showing that you had a mastery of that subject matter. This would be most applicable for things like biology and engineering and mathematics. Biology is an interesting one because that may always need to exist at a university level. People may need to be hands-on and collaborative and be able to work in laboratories. And maybe that's what we should gear those facilities towards, is these sophisticated laboratories that can't be replicated virtually. What I hope as we get through this pain is that we enter a true renaissance for this country. That we get enthusiasm about growth and unity. And I think that maybe encouraging the youth to explore ways that they can be productive without having looming debt and financial crises over their heads is probably a good way to do that. If someone's coming from nothing, we'd like them to not just have to get lucky, but just through regular old hard work be able to achieve the dreams of property ownership and some sort of financial security. We're going to need to change the way this system is working in some way, shape, or form to do that. And I'm not confident in our market's ability to have real growth that isn't just, an inflated market above what levels should be and above what values should be until we do that. The ongoing negotiations about how stimulus will come out, probably going to go through the summer. Look what happened with Trump. Absolutely nothing got done into the fall. So we'll probably see that again, because that is the government's fault, not just Trump's. It's still, by and large, the same government that was there. Be patient. Be open to smart change. And be open to smart debate so that people don't make change that we're going to regret. Continue to go into debt on all the wrong things. That's what we try to teach our youth, right? Don't go into debt on a really expensive car when you're in high school. Go take that debt and put it into your education, right? Invest in yourself. Well, let's make those lessons actually hold true. Right now, you get the right car and you put the right meme up and you portray yourself properly on social media, and you can probably make a lot more money than you could ever make investing in your education. And that's not to say someone should do that, but there should be a lot of hope and promise in education, so that the only cool thing isn't just taking wild chances on Dogecoin and Lambos. Let's wait to see some legislation on cryptocurrency. Let's bet on America by not getting over-leveraged ourselves, so that we're ready for some hard times and we can take a little damage if that reset will allow us to get on a more sustainable trajectory. And let's not only do that with our money, but let's do that with our time and the way we treat other people. Let's cool down the arguing about stupid stuff. And instead of arguing about stupid stuff, do a little research on real solutions and real problems. I'm not betting on a market crash, but I know it's a high probability. And I would like to see us get through some reflection of that uncertainty with a market that isn't constantly growing in exchange for not having it look like it's growing and then fall off a cliff. I'd recommend that you look at like using short options, like buying puts instead of taking all your money out of the market. But if you're over leveraged, don't do that anymore. Get the money out of the market that shouldn't be there and learn your lesson. I think no matter how you look at it as an exchange investor right now, you've got to be willing to take some short-term losses. Crypto is an abstract, speculative hedge, in my opinion, in that down the line, as digital currency becomes a standard, it will gain an immense amount of value, especially in terms or in relative terms to the dollar. However, right now, if you've been watching, the way the money is going in from the same sources that put money into the stock market, wealthy people and big funds and institutions. And globally speaking, crypto is tracking the stock market. So don't expect if the stock market crashes for crypto to hold up. It'll probably go with it. That's okay. People who are crypto aficionados will probably spend a lot of time trying to pick the unicorns that in a potential crash won't sell off and will be hedges. But for the regular person, that's not worth spending any time on. I still think that treasury bonds are trash, but I think that your traditional, like precious metals, gold, obviously, silver, copper, are all good relative hedges. But if this is your first go-round, again, realize that these hedges do not mean that you make money when things go bad. Gold most likely is not going to become this 2x or 10x asset over the next couple of years, probably ever. So just be careful with all of that. The takeaway from the crypto is that, yes, it is a hedge, but don't expect it to function that way this year. You're speculating that it will be a hedge in the long term, but you don't want to have any money that you're not prepared to not touch for quite a while this year. And for some people who are prepared to not touch a lot, if we pull out of this thing and get back to the bull run, they can make a lot of money. But again, that goes to figuring out how you define yourself as a trader and understanding your own risk tolerance. I've been working on trying to bring some humor to the podcast. That's why there was a little delay. But this isn't really funny. And I wanted to just check in and remind some people to be mindful about their money. And I'm going to try to protect my own money and focus on some other things that will help me grow, help my security, and get through this pain, doing it the right way. And if it is a 2008, I watched a lot of mistakes people made in 2008, and I'm just going to focus on being proud of myself for not coming out of my fighting stance and doing things better than that last generation of people who lived through a serious, serious problem. Oh yeah, and check out my NFTs on OpenSea. Links are in my bios.